In our previous videos, we've been looking at the research process, and then just recently we looked at research ethics. We're now going to start diving into the different research methods. So we want to identify different research designs and the methods that go with them. So let's first by differentiating between qualitative research and quantitative research. And then the videos that come after this will get into those more qualitative research approaches like focus groups, and then those will be followed by more quantitative approaches. So let's start by defining these. All right, when we talk about qualitative versus quantitative, the word quantitative means that it uses math. So when we're looking at quantitative research, we are looking at research methods that use mathematical analysis. So when we think about quantitative research, we're thinking about surveys or experiments where we can do statistical tests. We can do hypothesis testing, inferential statistics, and we'll get to those in videos. But you might also be doing research where it is more qualitative. So qualitative is where we are not doing math. So our qualitative research is going to be our research methods that really what we're doing is collecting more text. Okay, so it's research findings that are not subjected to quantification or quantitative analysis, so they're not math, they are more text-based. And so when we think about qualitative research, these are things like focus groups or interviews, and where we are looking at text and where it is more open-ended, then that does create some challenges in the analysis. Where we're finding as we move to machine learning and AI, and we'll get to videos that analyze text using machine learning and AI, is that does give us the ability to be a bit more objective in the analysis of text. Up until machine learning and AI, the analysis of text is a lot more of cut, sort, and arrange, which we'll talk about how to do in a later video. But we're looking for themes, and the challenge, of course, with this is that if it's open-ended, people may choose to talk about things or not. And so it's really hard to extrapolate whether something is felt by or thought by the greater group if they didn't think of it, right? So you're only hearing from the people who just happen to have that idea at the top of their head. Others may feel the same, but in qualitative research, it's more difficult to get at that. So we often use qualitative research for more brainstorming and exploratory research to get the ideas. And then we turn it into more quantitative research by turning it into survey questions to find out how many people feel the same way. So then we could do math and say this percentage feels this way, or this percentage feels that way, or one group feels differently than the other based on how they responded to the survey. So we often use the qualitative for more exploration and quantitative for more descriptive or causal. With AI machine learning, we can do a bit more with the qualitative research than in the past, and so we will get to videos on how to do that later on. So the big difference between qualitative and quantitative. So qualitative is often used for more probing, think interviews and focus groups. The sample sizes are going to be much smaller. The amount of information, the amount of detail we can get, though, is quite substantive. So we get rich information, but it's very difficult to figure out if everybody else has the same thoughts. And so the analysis can be much more subjective, much more interpretive, but that also means that it's hard to extrapolate to the group, to the bigger population, and the replicability is low. Right? So that's why we're using it for exploration, because we can't necessarily repeat the process with others if we're asking people just to brainstorm or give ideas. But because it is a small sample, we can probe, we can ask people for examples, we can find out why they feel certain ways. It is a much more closer relationship between the participant and the researcher. And so you might be using tape recordings, projection devices, video recorders, discussion guides. You might have them create pictures for you to then explain how they feel or what they experienced. So you may have a number of documents or equipment that you're using as part of it. But really, we're probing, we're exploring. With the quantitative research, we have very limited probing. We are taking a much bigger group and finding out if there is consensus. So when we look at the quantitative research, we're thinking more things like surveys, where we have standardized much of the process with our questionnaires. We can then do statistical analysis on that. So it has less probing capabilities, but there we're looking for more, does everyone agree? And so it is more descriptive in terms of describing who feels what way, what are these people about, or in terms of measuring impact or cause. We're thinking about experiments or test markets. If this happens, then that happens, and we can measure that statistical significance, whether there really is truly a impact of one variable on another. So this next set of videos we're going to get into is really focused on the qualitative. And so let's talk about why we would want to use qualitative research. It tends to be cheaper than quantitative simply in the fact that the sample size is smaller and the analysis is a bit more simplistic. That being said, now that we get into AI and machine learning, if we are using AI and machine learning to analyze text, reviewing documents, transcripts, interviews, that is a more complicated AI machine learning method. We're talking about large language models and identifying what words mean by machines. That's much harder to do with the machine learning than it is to do some statistical analysis. So qualitative research, the sample size is small, and if you're using the basic analysis methods we're going to talk about in the next couple videos, then it's cheaper. If you're going to go AI approach, then it's more complicated and requires more computational power. So we'll look at it from both ends in our set of videos. The benefit of qualitative research is that your client can gain firsthand knowledge. We are going to be looking at focus groups in a couple videos, and one of the benefits of focus groups is you can have a setup that looks something like this. This is a clip from the Colbert Report, and what you see here is that he's behind behind the glass watching the focus group. And if I just see if I can scrub forward in the video just a second there you go. He's actually behind the mirror that you see here watching, and by the fact that it's a mirror that they can't see him watching them, it's less likely that his watching is impacting their responses. They are informed that there are people behind the glass, but because people can't see others watching them, it is less likely to impact what they say, but it allows for the stakeholders, the client who you're doing the research for, to have firsthand knowledge of how people behave and what words people are using. And here they're providing feedback on commercials, and this is political advertisements that they're putting out. And so he's behind the glass on that. So the client can gain firsthand knowledge by observing when you have those qualitative, like the focus group. Qualitative research can be used in that exploratory process initially on. When we talk about that process for research, we talked about how the first part is about defining the problem, and exploratory research designs can be used to help define the context, help clarify what the problem is, help us understand before we get into other types of research. So this qualitative research can improve the efficiency, the effectiveness of quantitative research. For example, we want to do a survey about the features of particular products and whether or not customers like the color, the amenities that come in different vehicles, for example. The first thing we might do is show the vehicle to a focus group and get them to use words to describe the product. We can then take those words and put them in a survey to see if other people feel the same way. So we're getting the focus group, the qualitative research, to give us the terminology that our other customers might use. And then we do the survey to see if the greater group feels the same way. So we're using qualitative research to improve the efficiency of quantitative research. We can use it to identify the problems to help clarify the issues. So we could have a focus group asking people about how we can Let's say we have a focus group of our employees. How do we get more engagement of the greater faculty, the greater employee group? And so they're helping us identify problems and issues. Maybe we're getting them to brainstorm for our strategic plan. And so it can help define what that problem is and the research problem itself. The challenge, of course, with qualitative research is it doesn't distinguish between small differences in attitudes, whereas on a quantitative research, we can ask a survey question and have a Likert scale or opinion scale where you strongly agree and strongly disagree and all the steps in between. We can measure the level of opinion, how strong or how weak it is, with that standardized scale in a survey. In a focus group, in an interview where people are giving their feelings, it's much harder to quantify the level of that feeling compared to somebody else. So it's difficult to kind of measure that difference in attitudes. And that's why we use qualitative typically more for brainstorming and ideas as opposed to measuring the scale of something. And remember that with the qualitative research, it tends to have a much smaller sample size. And so the people that are giving us the feedback, if we're conducting an interview, we're doing a focus group, they may not represent the greater population. So it may just be their thoughts and ideas or feelings and not necessarily indicative of everybody else. So there are pros and cons to using qualitative research. Often in the world where I work, it's often qualitative first and then quantitative to see if everyone else kind of agrees. And the qualitative is then more brainstorming. If you live in the world of more psychology, more social sciences, you may live only in a qualitative research area. If you are in more health sciences and medical sciences, and we're looking at more like clinical trials, you may live only in the world of quantitative research. So it's important to know the different research methods and when they are appropriate and what might be appropriate for your discipline. In our next video, we're going to dive into more detail on focus groups, and then later videos will look specifically at interviews as we get into other different research methods.